In June 2025, I did a recording looking at 22 plus reskilling and upskilling within apprenticeships, particularly what business schools could offer within the apprenticeship. Please do go and have a look at that. This is a follow-on because what is now being left unexplored is what are the options for 16 to 21-year-olds. I'm not going to go over the history of the changes that has moved a lot of the funding towards 16 to 21-year-old. Please go and look at the original one I did back in June. I want to explore where does this leave us in the 16 to 21-year-old age bracket. For many of these, this will be entering into employment, and for those that are entering with graduate degrees, the graduate market. So a little summary update here in November 2025 in terms of the recent changes. We've seen a split where the levy can be used, where there's been a split on the funding. Half can be used on apprenticeships, the other half can be used for lifelong learning in terms of the entitlement, lifelong learning entitlement. A big shift has been that postgrad levy funding has been restricted to 16 to 21-year-olds, or funding has been restricted to 16 to 21-year-olds, and this impacts a lot of the postgrad funding, such as senior leader apprenticeship and others. I'm going to return to this because if the funding is, the intention is to move funding towards younger people, why? What is the need there? And what does that look like in today's economy and labour market? That's the key presentation that I'm going to be looking at. IFATE, of course, has been closed. It was merged with the Department of Education. It was then moved into Skills England, working with the Department of Education, and the apprenticeships now have been moved into work and pensions. The lifelong learning entitlement, which kicks in September 2026, will provide new loans for post-18 education up to the age of 60. The key features is its funding, its flexibility, those who are eligible, its inclusion. The maintenance loans will also be available for eligible in-person part-time courses. The system replacements, and then the introduction of the timeline. We're looking, of course, to see what courses are going to be funded in terms of smaller courses, particularly for adult education, come April 2026. Again, I might do an update in May in terms of my reflections on those. Considering the challenges that the change in funding creates for adult education, particularly, for example, the senior leader apprenticeship, I asked my friend ChatGPT what other forms of training and development, other forms of programs it could suggest, which would not be obviously reliant on the funding for adults, which is no longer available. What I find very interesting is the huge gap that has been created. There's executive leadership certificate, but again, this is employer sponsored. There's micro-credentials. This is becoming a very popular buzzword, but is it certified? Is there a credential? How do we measure that credential? How do we transfer those credentials? Could we break up apprenticeship programs and give it value, such as the SEEK level descriptors, which indicates those transference of those kinds of measurements? But again, this is not funded per se by any funding at the moment. Professional conversion programs for mid-career switches, again, this could be a potential, but again, where the funding comes from is still up in the air. Degree apprenticeship-like programs, but again, fully commercially funded is another option. Of course, boot camps have been around in terms of the growth and skills levy, but this is for people who generally don't have employment, not for those in employment who are looking to upskill and reskill. Hybrid executive MBAs, but again, this has to be employer sponsored. Corporate partnership, custom programs, again, this is employer sponsored. Alumni upskilling subscriptions, University for Life models, again, a subscription-based service, which means, again, self-funded. International executive education, corporate training for non-UK markets. Again, this would be funded by the employers. And again, professional qualifications and a university stackable process. But again, most likely this is the employer who will be paying. What the summary really gives is great ideas, very creative, but the funding for it is all driven by the employers. Now, again, in a market where these things are slowing down because of policy changes, taxation changes, increases in national insurance, the whole thing is stalling, and the upskilling and reskilling of adults in education, in my opinion, as I'm doing this in November 2025, it seems to have stalled. I don't see how we're going to get out of this conundrum. So where does this leave young people? Where does this leave early careers? Let's turn to them next. They are the key focus of the funding. So where does it leave us? Of course, when we're talking early careers, we're talking Gen Z. I've pulled just a number of headlines that have been coming out this year. I think they are quite pivotal. They're quite insightful. Let's start on the top left-hand side. Gen Z college graduates are entering the toughest job market in years. This is from fortune.com. I have no doubt that this is true. In fact, we'll see this right down at the bottom. We can see that Gen Z jobs crisis is real. 1.2 million recent grads in the UK are competing for just 17,000 graduate positions. It's not that the value of a degree has declined. It's the job market that's declined. And the job market's declined because of an economic decline in terms of economic growth within the country. I find it strangely bizarre that we're blaming university and university degrees, which you can then see by the other headlines. It's so demoralizing. UK graduates exasperated by high unemployment. I regret going to uni. UK top firms hire fewer diverse graduates as competition surges. Degree apprenticeships less accessible to disadvantaged young people than Russell groups. And there's one more. Those are some of the headlines that are connected. I think we need to avoid a simple black and white kind of answer. The market is challenging, hugely challenging. The government is throwing a lot of money and a lot of opportunities at younger people, Gen Z early careers. But it's a challenging labour market. That's what's causing this, and a slowing down of economic growth within the UK. Even where we are throwing money at, for example, data, look what's going on in the data industry. Over 1 million job cuts rattle tech industry in 2025. Amazon, Meta, Google, Intel. It's a very, very disruptive labour market. And this is why the Independent reports in February 2025, this is why the UK is losing talented young people to other countries. Now, this is the key thing that I want to focus in on. We are losing adult education because of the funding that's been moved away from it. Upskilling and reskilling will no longer be able to take place funded. Employers would need to find ways to go back to kind of human resource management programs to do that. A lot of the funding is focusing on young people, but the young people are facing one of the most disruptive labour markets that I can remember. So what does this all mean? Well, here's some data. On the left-hand side, this is pretty much the dates that's highlighted that are referred to as Gen Z. Now, I know there's a lot of contention around generational studies, etc., but they do share similar characteristics. They have grown up under similar circumstances. Look at what they've experienced. So using these dates on the left-hand side for Gen Z, and then transferring those dates through the various crises that they have literally lived through, it's phenomenal that they have survived this. And it's no wonder that they are a completely different employee generation in terms of what they want from employment. They were there at 9/11. They were literally 0 to 4. The 7/7 bombings in London, they were 0 to 8. The credit crunch, they were 0 to 10. They would have noticed the financial stress in the home among their parents. The global recession between 2007 and 2009, they were 0 to 12. Austerity in the UK began in 2010. They were 0 to 13. Then COVID hit. They were between the ages of 8 and 23 when that happened. Then inflation between the ages of 10 and 25. And then now the cost of living crisis in 2024 between the ages of 12 and 27. There's not been a moment for this generation to breathe. No wonder they demand so much from the employment market. But many others have simply just given up on the economic wheels. The European Foundation 2025 suggests that NEET, those not in employment, education or training, have emerged as one of the most vulnerable groups following the 2008-2013 Great Recession. Youth unemployment soared above 40% in many EU countries, and this highlighted how young people are more vulnerable to economic recession than any other age group. So in some ways, yes, the government policies to move funding towards this age group does meet a particularly vulnerable age group. But we're seeing two things happening here based on the data. An estimated 12.7% of all people aged 16 to 24 years in the UK were NEET. 12.7%. What about those that are in education, that are in training? Randstad did some research in 2024, and they indicated that Gen Z will remain in a career for about 1.1 years. Not because they don't have resilience, not because they are badly being defined as the snowflake generation, but because their jobs are replaced by technology. They've been replaced in terms of staff cuts, etc., etc. But this does mean that they are not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're looking to have a number of things running along the side in order to give themselves financial security. Why does this all matter? I'm involved in education, I'm involved in apprenticeship programs, I'm involved in career development programs. And it's these programs, if done effectively, they will determine the economic growth of countries. So where does this leave us in the UK? So looking at the data, we find ourselves in a bit of a precarious situation. 12.7% of the generation 16 to 24 is NEET. They're not in education, they're not in any kind of training, they're not in employment. Of that population, 0 to 29, the 30 odd million, the 16 to 24 year olds, that's 7.5 million, and 54% of that is working. They're a working age, 16 to 24 year olds. The others might be in education. We know that 12.7 are NEET. An economy needs people working. We know we are living in an aging population in the UK. We need the economy to be growing. We need that economy to sustain things like pension and to sustain the economic growth overall. But the problem we're finding is that a lot of those that are able to contribute to the economy are not finding those opportunities and they are leaving. We have a situation where we don't have enough jobs. Those that are qualified are leaving, and we have 12.7% who are NEET. We are slowly developing a real issue here. And what we found in the first recording is that funding to develop reskilling and upskilling of the present working population is also being withdrawn. Where the government did invest 1.2 billion in these emerging industries, the industry strategies, here's an announcement from FE Week: teacher shortages and lack of space. Teacher shortages, that's reskilling and upskilling. They were not able to deliver on the construction courses and they had to halt. So even with all the funding being thrown at younger emerging generations, because we've neglected the upskilling and reskilling, those are not able to be delivered to the younger generations. And those that are engaging in that are potentially leaving to look for other opportunities further abroad. Happy New Year. Some things to consider as we approach 2026 quite rapidly. what are we going to do about this turmoil in the labor markets, and how are we going to respond to this as educationalists and as institutions?